Runescape. It's a polarising game, and one that I've been routinely checking into since 2001, and to this day I'm still not entirely sure why. To outsiders, it may appear to be a boring clickfest grind, but there's a whole lot more than meets the eye. It holds a strong loyalty spell over fans of the game that can last many years. I'll be covering the early period of Runescape, or as it's known now, Runescape Classic, touching on subjects like the differences in mechanics compared to Runescape 3 and how it had an effect on players, including me. Way back in 2001, I was around 12 years old. My previous internet dealings included silly chat rooms, playing Habbo Hotel, and looking on GameWinners.com for PlayStation cheats. That's if, of course, no one else was using a computer at the time. An online friend, a fresh concept indeed, mentioned a fantasy game called Runescape, where you can make a character and fight alongside other people from around the world. Having grown up on Nintendo and Sega consoles, such scope was incomprehensible to me. I registered for Runescape and I started playing. Let's just say, in 2001, my life was changed for better or worse. At the time, Runescape wasn't very user-friendly, especially when compared to the hand-holding that you'll find in today's rendition. Before Tutorial Island existed, players were dumped into the game and left to their own devices. You were presented with a choice of classes for your character. You could be an adventurer, warrior, wizard, ranger or a miner. These weren't character-defining traits like in MMOs today. These were simply skill presets for your character, and you were given relevant equipment to start off with. This didn't last for long though, as it was removed in early 2002. Instead of classes, all players were given a bronze hatchet, cooked meat and a tinderbox. How generous. It may be hard to relate for some now, but being dumped into a strange, violent world was very visceral. Gone were the safe worlds of linear single-player games and happy chat rooms. They were nothing compared to standing in a world of real players and deadly enemies. There were no tutorials. The only direction you had were a few scant beginner quests. The meat of the early game was to fight low-level enemies like chickens, rats and eventually cows when you had learnt to put one foot in front of the other. The newbie area of Lumbridge was the equivalent of a bunch of toddlers splashing around in puddles, while passing veteran players hovered around in their full sets of armour like dazzling gods, handing out coins and free starter gear to players who had just landed in this strange land. The main reason I fell in love with Runescape was because it didn't try to make you the hero of the universe. Instead, you were just another bit of meat sent to the eventual slaughter. Even to this day, I can't think of another MMO-styled game which allows you to be a nobody, a literal peasant. While combat may have been the bulk of RuneScape's gameplay, the meatiest part of the game were the available skills. You could mine rocks, cut down trees, and cook some food. These weren't just set abilities every player was born with. You actually had to get better at these or risk being handicapped or reliant on others. Being able to live out my medieval jabroni fantasy was fantastic. I was weak in combat, but I could mine a good ore and make some coin at the end of the day. You'd have players that only trained combat and relied on other players for food, or players stayed at level 3, the starting combat level, but they became master skillers. No matter what playstyle you etched out for yourself, it was always towards a greater goal. The everything or nothing approach is probably why so many players played and still play RuneScape today. You were not immediately pigeonholed into a playstyle, and such freedom was a thrill to experience as a young gamer like myself at the time. If you've ever played a just 5 more minutes type game, then this is exactly what RuneScape was, constantly dangling a carrot over every aspect of gameplay. Combat, gain a few levels and you'll be able to wear an iron helmet. Or if you're skilling, Just hit a few more trees and you'll be able to get this shiny steel hatchet. You'll like it. Each skill in RuneScape has milestones of ability or choice of equipment. You always wanted to progress because you could catch more valuable fish or finally wield that mithril longsword. So how did such a basic sounding game grab our attention for so many years? I personally think it was a community of players all in the same boat. Each person could be part of the machine that was the RuneScape economy. Fishing, for example, wasn't a wasted effort like it is in most RPG games. If you had a decent level in fishing, you could fish lobsters and eventually sharks to sell to higher level players who enjoyed the art of player killing. Miners could melt the ores they mined into metal bars, either for use in making their own armour or for other would-be blacksmiths in the world. Nearly all skills in RuneScape were useful to some degree. The things you created would be traded to fellow players, and not just a bottomless vendor in exchange for some pesky coins. Somewhere in the world, a real player was surviving on the lobsters that you caught. If you were like me and weren't too fussed with combat, but you enjoyed the more economic side of the game, you could really make some good money here. As a business owner, I can say RuneScape was one of the first games that taught me about basic buying and selling. The game never said to be this or that, to be a warrior, to be a coal merchant. That was the beauty of it. You could craft your own little business and establish contacts within the game. Most of the people that I added were after my regular coal supply. It was such a raw thing to experience as a young teen. Normally, selling stuff to vendors in video games is par for the course, but to be selling and building a network with other humans felt like real work. Even though I was not making money in real life, being 12 or 13 years old, it was just such a powerful figure at the time. You come from playing games, playing with cars, pissing about, to be establishing what is basically a real business within a game is just fantastic. Before the Grand Exchange existed, selling goods meant going over to the centre of Varrock and spamming "press 1 to buy coal certs, wee," until some bugger eventually typed your code. It was usually 111 or something easy to type, because you would be constantly typing it, believe me. So until someone PM'd you, you're not going to be selling your goods today, unfortunately, my friend. A lot of people are still salty about the Grand Exchange and prefer the old way of doing things. As nostalgic as I am over the good old days, I prefer how we have it today. Don't get me wrong, the joy of finding a buyer and initiating the trade was very cool, almost thrilling in a way, but I definitely prefer teleporting to the Grand Exchange and just offloading my guff to the ether. Don't even get me started on Niles, Giles and Miles. Ooh. I actually like both, but I want both the old days and the new era smashed together, which obviously is never going to happen. I've just said how I love a new feature over the old way, but deep down, I'll always be a RuneScape Classic diehard. There's no winning or losing for me. It's such an internal mess of love and dislike. Let me try and explain. My fondest memories of RSC were the players. In fact, my earliest player memory was of a girl who found me chopping trees between Falador and Draenor Manor. I was bleary-eyed and not entirely sure what I was doing. I was quite enjoying chopping trees and occasionally being assaulted by giant spiders. This player must have seen my low level and wondered what on earth I was doing at such a random location. We chatted for a bit and she offered to take me to Varrock, one of the main cities. Along the way, she explained a lot of the game to me. It was then I discovered how vast the game world was. When we arrived in Varrock, I was given leather armour, gloves and boots to give me a defensive buff. We parted ways at the training dummies so I could gain some valuable combat experience without the fear of being killed. This little experience felt like an opening mission to a normal single player game, but it was entirely dynamic and would only be personal to me. I found my first friend and it felt so cool. Being a solitary console player, such adventures were thrilling to me. These were the kind of experiences I had with RuneScape constantly. I remember being tailed by jerks and having to lose them in towns, chatting to folks in the cooking guild while making bread, and making the arduous trip to Karamja for the lobsters. Everything felt like it was intertwined with the human player base. There were always people knocking around doing the same things as you in every corner of the world. I know the video's not titled Rag on Modern Runescape, but I find that this element of the game has been stripped away over time. The newbie part of RuneScape is over with so quickly now. It's not really a memory, but more of an obstacle. I haven't played the current 2017 tutorial, but the last one I did experience involved being forced into some quests right away. It had mines and dragons and stuff. Albeit in RuneScape's browser graphics, it was similar to an opening segment of Skyrim or similar fantasy games. I found it was way too much. Although I did admire the cutscene work and visuals, Jagex have done a bloody splendid job with the cosmetics over the years, but it absolutely wasn't the RuneScape that I knew. New players got bullied by the highwayman near Draenor Manor. They overcame the odds in the sewer under Varrock, and if you were particularly lucky, a very generous player would donate a full set of plate armour to you. A linear mission is great for new players now, and it's a modern day trend, but it was so jarring to see how different this game had become. Hey, that's what 15 years of progress does, eh? The player driven experiences that I spoke about, they were lovely to experience and be a part of, but of course, like anything, they weren't all fantastical. Occasionally, you would run into jerks who would try to scam you when trading goods. The trading interface back then was a little more primitive. Some folks would remove the items they were trading to you. If you weren't paying attention, you could give away goods without receiving anything in return. You'd also get stupid morons following you, begging for stuff and goodness knows what. I can't think of any super bad experiences, but I wanted to add some contrarian stuff just so I don't sound too rose-tinted. As with any game that deals in real humans, you'll always get the arseholes. I personally loved the basic look of RSC. In fact, I loved the old plate armour so much that my RS3 character has a replica set. When I'm pissing about, I like to dust off my 2003 Halloween scythe to see if any vets can sniff me out. It's a little bit pretentious, but it's nice to spark some random conversation while skilling. Everything looked so crude. All the players had the same shirt and trousers combo. The enemy humans were just dudes in black dress shirts. I don't think players were bothered by the lack of cosmetic variants. We were all taken in by the grandeur of the world. It's weird how RuneScape vets will defend the old game when really the older versions are much worse than the current iterations. Mechanically, everything's much better in the newer releases. Objectively speaking, Classic was a bloody slog. Bankers could only talk to one player at a time, so if you're in a busy world, you could be waiting a minute or two just to open your bank screen. The combat was similar to RS2, minus the power attacks. The only choice was deciding what combat skill to level up, and we prayed the enemies we attacked were weak enough to kill. Skilling wasn't automated, and armour took up your inventory space, so combat excursions were exercises in deciding how much food to take or how much loot you may anticipate. I never took part in player killing in the wilderness, as I was too much of a wuss to be honest. It took me ages to grind stuff out. I hated the thought of losing my precious junk. Player killing, or PKing, and dueling were also big parts of RSC, and also one of the reasons private RSC servers are still active today. As I never took part, I can't really offer any opinion in this area. You'll have to travel back in time 15 years ago and tell me to stop being such a fanny. Still, I did used to enjoy hanging on the edge of the Wildy and selling some food to the PKers, another little activity that probably no longer happens. One last thing I do want to bring up is the old look of Rune. Rune in RuneScape Classic looked so fantastic. It was bright and gleaming. I absolutely adored the look of the Rune two-handed sword. It was such a mystical weapon that everyone wanted, so chunky and delicious. What a beast. When RuneScape 2 rolled around, we had this matte blue look, and all of the rune now looked dull, including the weapons. The bright sheen got across how rare and magical all rune items were. It was similar to how diamond stuff looks in Minecraft. I recall being at drop parties and seeing these bright valuable items drop, each time experiencing a miniature heart attack. Dropping rune for free, are these guys fucking mental? Reminiscing about RSC is like listening to old people chastise younger generations about how hard they had it back in the day. Older players seem to take pride in this when really it means nothing to the newer generation. Of course I love RuneScape Classic.
It was my first experience of the game, the same way Runescape 2 players revere their version and think Classic looks like crap, doubly so for 12-year-olds today who would take one look at Runescape 2 and think, wow, what a piece of shit. Runescape is steeped in history like no other game I can think of, one that still progresses so much but also keeps its older iterations active. It's what I love about Jagex and how they're loyal to their earlier versions. Sadly, I'm locked out of the real RuneScape Classic because I made the jump to RuneScape 2, transferring my character over for good. I can only experience it now via the many private servers out there. So many companies push the latest and greatest, while Jagex respects its history and thrives. Just look at old school RuneScape. What a tremendous endeavour. People cried that RuneScape was dead and was going in a shitty direction, so the guys at Jagex responded with OSRS, aka RuneScape from 2007. Personally, I can't play this version with my 1440p screen as the window is hilariously small, and yep, I've tried using the magnifier tool, but I'm not hardcore enough to squint and fart around. I do believe there is a UI scaling update in the works for OSRS, so maybe I'll dig in when that's released. I'm absolutely spoiled by the full screen mode these days. Releasing old school RuneScape pacified the players who weren't happy with RuneScape's modern day direction. The players who disliked modern RuneScape now had a fully working 2007 version to keep them happy. OSRS is still popular to this day, and it wasn't just a flash in the pan nostalgia project. The same can't be said for RuneScape Classic though. There was one last drive for it in 2016 and it finally closed its doors on the 31st of December 2016. Access is still open, but only for the veterans who never changed over to RuneScape 2, or for previous members who managed to sign up when Jagex allowed it. I always miss the periodic registration windows for RuneScape Classic access, but never mind. Even though RuneScape has changed dramatically over the years, the essence of being a nobody is still there. Sure, the quests today are large, story-driven adventures, and everything looks so flashy, but you can still happily log on and make some arrows or cook some fish and call it a day. Even after all of these years, I've not maxed out the fishing level yet. My sessions are much shorter than most people, but it's a skill which I always pursue each time I resub. How people get 99s in multiple skills I'll never know, outside of the Bible ones of course. I really can't think of a game that offers such mundane jobs as in-game skills. By the way, I'm speaking of pre-2010 games as Steam Early Access came along, and we have a lot of trashy simulators and goodness knows what out there today. When I played World of Warcraft, I pined for these mundane skills. World of Warcraft had a fishing mechanic and resource collecting, but they felt really tagged on. I used to like fishing stone scale eels for good money, but it felt more like a distraction than a progressive gameplay element. It felt like the game was saying, why are you doing this instead of raiding? The same could be said for mining. It was just stuff you found along the way, rather than a skill you actively sought to level up. Questing and being the hero has its moments, but when none of your friends are logged in and you don't fancy slaying dragons, it's lovely to kick back and enjoy some skilling. I don't know what it is about boring manual labour tasks, but having them featured in a game is just really captivating to me. They manage to make virtual chores fun somehow. Sometimes I stop myself from subbing just to skill, because my mind tells me to do something more productive or worthwhile with my time, but I always end up subbing every year. It's the RuneScape curse, I tell you. Even with all the niche games we have today, I still like to keep an eye out for games that simulate this medieval peasant lifestyle. The closest game I've found throughout the years is one called WURM. In a similar vein to RuneScape, you can invest hours into getting good at mining, cooking and lots more. It's been around for years and was recently released on Steam as WURM Unlimited. That's WURM, not ORM like a little worm. You can spend hours cutting down trees, flattening some dirt and finally plopping down foundations for a new home. It's quite an unforgiving game, but for those who love a grind and have never heard of it before, check it out. I think I enjoy the concept of WURM more than actually enduring it, and yeah, I said enduring. If this came along when I was 12 and carefree, then maybe. I just can't invest the time it needs these days, but again, I do love the fact that such games exist out there. Unlike being thrashed at FIFA or being on the crap team in a Battlefield game, being a statistical loser isn't frustrating in RuneScape. You can go at your own pace and enjoy the game how you see fit. Sitting on the fishing guild jetties and chatting with others can be substantial entertainment in of itself. I think that's why I keep coming back to RuneScape and checking out its progress. A little potter at the fishing guild, a few slayer grinds, and I'm happy. I think it's a compliment to RuneScape, but there aren't many games you can enjoy while in another tab. It's now 2017 and my 2001 character is still a nobody. I'm certainly no Zezima. If it wasn't for my 10-year cape and 2003 scythe, no one would know I'm an older player. My skills are very average, I rarely have decent money, but I still have a deep fondness for RuneScape 15 or so years later. The latest NXT client is very impressive. It's quite something to visit all of my old haunts to see their modern renditions. I still find RuneScape 3 very busy looking. The user interface is very clunky in my opinion, and I struggle to tell players from NPCs, just to name a few issues. My love is from another era, so I don't like to drag RuneScape 3 through the mud too much. No one likes a serial moaner, especially when comparing a 15-year-old game. I'm sure if I spent a good 6 months in the game, I would be fully immersed, but I can no longer dedicate the time to that these days, sadly. A lot of my enjoyment of RuneScape these days is in spirit. I hunt down friendly people, I enjoy the mining guild from time to time. To be honest, a lot of the new content just blows me away, but I still love being a cog in a giant world that is RuneScape. Occasionally, I'll take part in an RSCEmulation server. They often have extreme XP boosts and other major changes. RSC is still playable and enjoyable, but you can never capture lightning twice. These communities are heavily modded, so things will not be as you remember. Most of these communities are constructed, so players can mainly focus on player killing. Everything else, including quests and the general spirit of the old game, is simply not there. It's a bit of a husk of a game, but if you really want to experience the mechanics and whatnots, then be my guest. I do recommend trying a server though, especially as RuneScape Classic is now closed off for new registrations. It's fun to indulge your nostalgic memories, and if you've never played RuneScape Classic, why not take a look and see what all the fuss was about. It was click heavy and looking back, poorly designed, but in 2001 it rocked my world and I'll never forget the experience. What are your memories of RuneScape Classic? How did it affect you? Do you still play every so often, be it older games or newer ones? Did you quit due to a poor direction, or are you still grinding it out after all of these years? Give me some discussion in the comments if you can. I'd love to hear, your little thoughts and your little stories. That's the best part of nostalgia, is just hearing the little bloody anecdotes and crazy tales from other players. Here's a little memory that I don't think anyone's going to remember. I can't be the only bugger that remembers this, but when I was a young teen with no payment card, I had to ask to buy a RuneScape sub and pay over the phone. The British switchboard voice was the corniest shit I've ever heard. It was some quasi-American text-to-speech voice, and it went something like this. Welcome to the RuneScape hotline. If you would like to buy a subscription to RuneScape, press 1. It was just this fucking horrible, nasty shit, and every month I had to listen to that garbage. If anyone remembers this, do indulge me. I'd love to hear that corny bastard again, but I doubt there's a recording of him anywhere on the planet. But anyways, that's all from me. Thanks for watching. It was great to chat about the subject of RuneScape Classic, a subject I'm so fond about. You never know, we may even cross paths on one of the jetties in the fishing guild. Who knows? So thank you once again, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you very much.